Hey, what's up, Truth Seekers? This is a question from the mailbag during the last show of 2017. I believe it was December 21st, 2017. I could be wrong about that, but it's a question about proofs for God. And I wanted to expound a little bit, maybe not so much correct, but expound on some things that I feel like Ben Shapiro left on the table that I definitely would have mentioned if it was my show and not Ben. So I hope you enjoy it.
Crystal says, hey, Ben, what would you say is the best evidence for God? What gives you a reason to believe? Thanks for all you do. My husband and I listen to your show every day and discuss it together. We're big fans. So I'm writing a book on this. The best evidence for God, as I have said on the show before, and as I say in debate with Sam Harris, which I think is going to, he'll be putting that out pretty soon if he hasn't already. The basic idea is that if you believe in free will, if you believe in human reason, if you believe in our capacity to understand the universe, if you believe in a predictable universe with laws that govern it, if you believe we do not live in a chaotic universe without meaning, if you believe that you can derive ought from is, then you need to believe in a divine creator. Okay, and that's not an argument for the Bible, but that is an argument for God, right? That's the Aristotelian argument for God, is that there is a rationale behind everything. If you believe there's a rationale behind everything, then you believe in God. And if you believe, as Aquinas did, that rationale is purely actual, right? Here's sort of the argument that Aristotle makes. The argument that Aristotle makes for the unmoved mover is not that everything has a cause and therefore there's God, because then the leftists and atheists just say, well, does God have a cause also?
Okay, now this is the question that I think Ben left unanswered, and it's the most important one. What does it all mean? If we have a creator, what is his cause? He talks about potentiality and actuality, which I'll jump back in at the end of this and expound on. But if the universe, as he goes on to say, is a universe of perfection and laws and order, then does this principle that is true apply at every level? I'll give you his answer, then I'll jump in on what I think Ben left on the table today.
Then the leftists and atheists just say, well, does God have a cause also? Right? The idea is that everything that you see in front of you at one point was another thing that was actualized. Right? That there's two that something has potential, and there's the potential and the actual. Right? Like this piece of paper right here, this has the potential to be ash, but it requires fire in order to make it ash. Now, fire itself also had a potential at one point, right? It was a match, and it was a piece of wood, or it was a rough surface. So it had the potential to be fire, but it was not fire. So in order for something to become actual, in order for potential to be actualized, it has to be acted upon by something that is either fully actual or something that is a combination of the actual with its own potential. The idea here would be that there is something that lies behind everything that is purely actual. Right? It is actuality itself. It is the most actual thing. And this thing cannot be material, because if it were material, then it would have potential for change. Right? It doesn't have potential for change, therefore it is purely actual. And that pure actuality also is all-knowing, because anything that exists has to come from a place of capacity for being actualized. And so it's the unactualized actualizer is the way that God would be put. If you want to read a good book about proofs of God, then Edward Fazer is a book I've recommended on the show. He has 5 proofs for the existence of God, quite a good book, and I recommend you check it out. Good Christmas read, actually. I would recommend that you check that out. Again, I think what it comes down to in the end is you either believe there's a purpose and meaning in human life or you don't. If you don't, you may end up an atheist. If you do, you're going to end up at God no matter how you slice it.
Okay, how do you do? Pretty good, right? I thought Ben did a really good job of describing potentiality and actuality. The way I always say it is, if you have a pen in your hand, it's just a cheap piece of plastic that almost is completely worthless. Throw some ink in there, and maybe it goes from 1 cent to 5 cents, or to 50 cents, or to $5 if it's a good pen. But the actuality of this potential, the actualization, can be limitless. The potential this has for greatness is incredible. And this is a principle that can be applied to this inanimate object, to people, and in my opinion, applied to all levels of creation. Now, in the case of the pen, I can write a symphony. I can write the Constitution. I can write a work that might affect the lives of many people and maybe change the course of history. That's actualization. What I want to talk about is how it relates to this question of what is God's cause. And to do that, I'm going to talk about Moses. Right? Something Ben Shapiro obviously would know a lot about. Moses is considered the greatest prophet in all of Judaism. And while I believe he was a great prophet, I think he was one of several different prophets of different dispensations. And this will probably be a video for a different day, but in Revelation, it talks about the 7 scrolls, which refer to 7 periods of time on the earth. So this misnomer that there's 6,000 years of the earth's age is ridiculous. Obviously, the earth is much, much, much older than that. But we do have 6,000+ years of recorded Judeo-Christian history and writings that have been preserved, and they represent 6,000-year time periods, which correlate with other writings that are in later scriptures. Moses was the leader of one of these dispensations, and there are other great prophets who've had the responsibility and accountability to lead others. What's important about this is he wasn't just called, he was prepared. He had seeds planted, he had experiences, he had all this potential which could not be actualized unless there was a path set in motion by a perfect creator and organizer to make sure he could carry out the job that he was called to do. There is wisdom in this that all of us can learn from. So I want to talk about experiences that Moses had to answer the question that Ben Shapiro threw out there but didn't answer. And to do that, I'm going to turn to some writings outside of Genesis, one of them being the book of Moses, another being some things that Josephus said, who lived right after the sacking of Jerusalem, and had some incredible insights to add to the gospel, to the writers, and to the experience. So first off, this question of what is the cause, this was answered to Moses during his one of many experiences that he had. And just to give you some background, I probably need to make another video about this, but Moses at this point in the 10 Commandments looks like he's mid-40s, maybe mid-50s at the latest. You know, he was 80 years old when this happened. He was 2/3 of the way through his life. He had had one of the most amazing lives that there was. He was the Prince of Egypt for a reason. Take Prince Harry and combine him with Winston Churchill. That was Moses. He actually saved the country from total annihilation. He did it because the Pharaoh's priests were trying to get him killed, much like David did with Uriah. They wanted to be rid of him, and they accidentally made him the most famous and revered person of all of Egypt. He gave all that up, and he had the fortuity to end up with one of the highest ordained priests in all Judaism at the time, who was Jethro, married his daughter, and was taught under his hand to be a great leader in their gospel in Judaism, and then eventually was given this experience where he was called to a much higher calling and asked to do things that few men before him have ever done. Now, the reason I'm telling you all this is that when you listen to Jordan Peterson, for example, who I critique from time to time because I think he doesn't take the next logical leap, right? He did something brilliant by describing philosophy in a way that makes it very interesting and then tying religious themes into it and saying, look, these people understood these things. They asked these same questions. They sought these same answers. And if you ever heard him get on his rant, they're delicious, right? They're hilarious. And Jung and these archetypes, and you get Aristotle, and even Nietzsche understood this is deep stuff, man. We gotta understand this. We gotta get into it. If you've heard him, you know what I'm saying, but he doesn't take the next logical leap to tie it all together and answer the question, what does it all mean? And I can prove this. I mean, when he started out, the comment section was flooded with, is this guy an atheist? Is he Christian? What is he? What does he believe? We don't know. I wish he would just tell us. It's like back when, Ricky Martin wouldn't tell his fans if he was gay. They're just dying to know. What do you believe? What do you want? And then he does the Bible series about Genesis, which I really enjoyed. And then they're asking, is he a mystic? Does he think it's myth? Is it metaphor? I mean, does he actually believe that it's literal? And it's because he's done a disservice by not tying it together and saying the truth here is that this actualization process is an eternal principle, and that it wasn't for us to stumble upon. It was preordained and preformed. And our seeking after it and learning it unlocks the mysteries of this life and of the universe. I know that's deep, but that is the truth. And it's also why I criticize atheists as saying you will never understand what I understand because you have prevented yourself from doing it by claiming these things don't exist. That is not a smart thing to do, but to each their own. Now, I'm going to use Moses as an example. During one of these instances, the Lord opened up the history of the race to him so that he could get a bigger scope of the creation, of the heavens, of astronomy, and what the Lord's work really entailed. The words which came next in the book of Moses, chapter 1, from the Lord constitute one of the most precious diadems of truth ever vouched to man from the heavens. I'll read those to you. In Moses chapter 1, verse 39, it says, "For behold, this is my work and my glory, to bring to pass the immortality and eternal life of man." God basically gave Moses his marketing pitch. This is why I'm in business. This is the call to action. This is why I do what I do. His rebel yell, right? That's it. That's what it means. It's so simple yet so profound. God has a cause, and everything you see and everything you experience and everything that's being created are to fulfill and to actualize that cause. The pen has potential. Human beings have potential. God has put a plan together for you to actualize that potential. What you don't understand is what's at the end of that road. Why go through it? I mean, every question that someone asks, especially skeptics of, why do we suffer? Why do we go through these experiences? Why doesn't God just appear? Why do we have to read fairy tales? I mean, it's all because it's on us. It's the philosophers who stumbled on these truths by searching and are trying to put them together like breadcrumbs, scraps, or puzzle pieces. But it's the prophets that knew clearly what the plan was and what would be required, and had to be very careful about what they shared and did not share with the people who were trying to make sense of all this. So I'll give you a couple examples, right? And I got to say, before I do this, one of my pet peeves is when Jordan Peterson does this, it's so deep and it's so meaningful. And oh man, I'm crying. I'm so moved. And Peterson's the man. If you couch it in terms of philosophy, that's the reaction you get. If you couch it in terms of scripture and holy writ and quote unquote superstition, it's all, hey, you're retarded. I mean, that's how stupid could you be? You're nebbish. And obviously that's childish. Everyone knows those things aren't true. All right. So let me tie a couple things together. And by the way, speaking of that, he talked about his debate with Sam Harris. I've done a couple videos that critique Sam Harris because it's mainly his fans, acting like these are new edge, cutting new ideas that Sam Harris articulates. One of the first times I came in touch with potentiality and actuality was actually when I was reading about Socrates and Protagoras years ago, and this debate that they had. Protagoras wrote a book called The Man is the Measure of All Things, right? And basically that you can self-define, that man is his own measuring rod, and that there's no objective morality, there's no absolute truth. And Socrates didn't agree with that. And they fought back and forth. So when there's a debate between Sam Harris and Ben Shapiro, to act like this is a new argument, to act like Sam Harris has anything to say that hasn't been said for thousands of years by millions of people is not true. It is the argument between actual enlightenment and earthly cunning. It's the obfuscation of light in favor of popular darkness. And it's important to know that Protagoras was the most popular sophist, professional sophist of his time, probably the highest paid man in Greek doing that work. So when you think about high paid sophists, who comes to mind? I'll let you fill in the blanks. Joel Osteen with whoever you think that it might be. Sam Harris. His ideas are popular, and there's a reason why. Doesn't mean they're true. Now, David in Psalms asked a similar question. Lord, what is man that thou takest knowledge of him? Or the son of man that thou makest account of him? David knew that he would be the progenitor of Jesus Christ. David was one of the most blessed people who'd ever lived. And he also suffered one of the greatest falls. But he wondered, why does someone so supreme and so great, so knowledgeable, omnipotent, omniscient, take knowledge of man? Because we're nothing. And this is what Moses said after his vision that he had. Now I know that man is nothing, something that I never before supposed. There were similar questions from other prophets. The more they got to know God, the more they wondered why man would have any meaning to him. Job said in chapter 7, what is man that thou shouldest magnify him? Thou shouldest set thine heart upon him. Thou shouldest visit him every morning and try him every moment. Now, Job is someone who's familiar with being tried, but he said he was still visited every day. Now, atheists would say this is ridiculous, but Job, who's managed to have his writings preserved for thousands of years, said it plainly. I get visited every morning. Had an experience where someone actually talked to me, shared something with me, whispered to me. I don't know. It doesn't say. It just said he was visited. But the question is, why should God magnify him? Put him under a magnifying glass, enlarge him, make him great, actualize him, and that thou shouldest set thine heart upon him. God is emotionally invested in him. Why? Well, it says this is his work and his glory. I'm going to steal here from a great scholar named Cleon Skousen, who said, man is the pride and pleasure of God and the object of his infinite devotion. He is no whimsical fantasy of God's creative power. He is no mere creature of chance cast upon the horizon of existing things by fickle circumstances, as postmodernists and maybe even some scientists would have you believe. In fact, God was soon to be revealed to Moses that thrilling fact that the Spirit, which is embodied in each and every human being, is a literal offspring of God. Whoa, slow down. Well, Paul wrote about it over 2,000 years later. In Hebrews chapter 12, he was talking to members of his own faith, saying, furthermore, we've had fathers of our flesh, those are our earthly parents, and they corrected us, and we gave them reverence. Shall we not much rather be in subjection to the Father of our spirits and live? Now in verse 8, but if ye be without chastisement, whereof are you partakers, then ye are bastards and not sons. Meaning if you will not endure chastisement and trials, in the words of Job, then you're bastards. He's comparing it to earthly parents. He's saying when you have earthly parents who correct you, you reverence them. You listen to them, you respect them, you learn from them. Why then, when you're given trials by the God of your spirit, do you not do the same? He's comparing parenthoods, right? He's saying earthly parents and godly parents are very similar in their action and their behavior, and our response should be similar. It's not the only time Paul speaks in these terms. In chapter 17, ironically, he's in Greece. He's in Athens, right? And what does he say? For in him, this is in God, we live and move and have our being, as certain also as your own poets have said. Who are these people? Greek poets. Paul was familiar with their work. He was familiar with what was important to the Athenians. He obviously knew that this discussion of actualization was happening right then. For in him we live and move and have our being. He's answering philosophical questions about our existence. And then he adds, for we're also his offspring. In verse 29, for as much as then as we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the Godhead is like unto gold or silver or stone. What's he talking about? Back then, their gods, they worshipped after they made emblems, statues, idols of gold, silver, and stone, graven by art and man's device. No, he says we shouldn't think of them like that. We are their offspring. We should think of them differently. He's teaching them a doctrine contrary to what the Athenians believed at the time. And then says in verse 30, in the times of this ignorance, God winked at. What's he referring to? There's 3 or 4 other references in the New Testaments about this ignorance, meaning that whether they were under the Judaic covenant or not, this has been a practice that's been held long through history of worshiping gods and emblems made by hands. And it says God winked at it. In other words, disregarded, overlooked, maybe acknowledged. But now the commandment is that all men everywhere should repent. Now we have a new covenant. The Messiah has come, and we're living a higher law. So Paul's made 2 references to God as a literal father and creator and compared him to our earthly parents. I think this is profound. This is not just actualization. This is a pattern of actualization. It's a pathway. It's a flashlight into the abyss of where do we go from here and what is the importance. If you look at your children and their potential every single year of their development, and if you look at your life and understand what they can actualize, what they can become, the power, the faculties, the command that they'll have on the earth, we have to think back to God and say, is this not the same pattern that we're following? Does our Father not know what we can become someday, not just physically, but spiritually, and what's at the end of the road? Does a child understand this actualization when he's 3, when he's 5, when he's 15, when he's 30? Does he understand what he can accomplish, what his potential is? I don't think so. I also don't think that we as humans, when we are 5, 30, 50, or even in this life, get a glimpse of what that potential is, which is why this principle of Aristotle that he stumbled upon and understood is a true one. I'll continue with Skousen. Man is so important to the work and glory of God that earths are created for the express purpose of being inhabited by him. That's a pretty bold statement. But guess what Isaiah said thousands of years earlier in chapter 45? For thus saith the Lord that created the heavens, God himself that formed the earth and made it. He hath established it. He created it not in vain, meaning it wasn't created by happenstance or by some Big Bang theory or the Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins mud crystals. He formed it to be inhabited. It also has a purpose and therefore an actuality. Its purpose is to help us accomplish ours. Ben talks about paper being on fire. I talked about a pen. The earth is a tool that was provided to us so that we could actualize our potential. And it has in itself an accountability and a stewardship over us, which is why we do over it. How does this affect our feel on climate change? Should we be worried about the earth being saved or ourselves? The earth is here for our benefit. Now, we have to be good stewards of it, but to say that we have the ability to create it or to knock it off its axis, ridiculous. We don't have that power. It's here to help us gain the power that God wants us to have. Going back to Skousen. Since God is man's literal father and creator, he looks upon his children like any other father. Their proper rearing is his work, and their individual attainment is his glory. That is the answer to the question. That is the cause.